This week on the show, we have OpenBSD 6.5 release. We also cover how to mount a ZFS dataset anywhere. We also help test the upcoming NetBSD 9 branch with a call for testing. LibreSSL 2.9.1 is available. The bail-bond denied edition of FreeBSD Jail's Mastery is also interesting. And we have one reason Ed was a good editor back in the days in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 296. It's alive! OpenBSD 6.5. Recorded on the 1st of May, 2019. Hello, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad that you've tuned in this week with our usual studio. Remember, last week Alan was in a different location, but now he's back in his usual place. And we have headlines for you, of course. OpenBSD 6.5 has been released. We couldn't make it to last week's episode because that one was already full, but now we give you the full coverage of the new release.
Mm-hmm. You know, as part of the update, they've improved quite a few things, including more hardware support, making Clang the default compiler for MIPS64. The default linker has been switched from the binutils BFD to the Clang LLD for both AMD 64 and i386. Octeon systems can now detect the number of cores. However, manually setting of num cores and core mask, etc. is still needed if you want to enable the secondary cores.
Mm-hmm.
They have more support for the Octeon GPIO, for KVM paravirtualized clock, the new IXL driver for Intel 700 series 10 gig Ethernet controllers, or I think that's 10 and 40 gig possibly. They have a driver for the i.MX system reset controller for embedded stuff, drivers for the Marvel Armada 7K and 8K GICP controllers, and a bunch of other interesting embedded stuff, and a new driver to support USB audio class devices, so that generic audio devices will just work under one generic driver.
Cool. And this is just hardware.
Yeah, improvements to the wireless stack, including improved transmit rate selection for the IWM driver, which is the modern Intel one, improved radio hardware calibration for the ATHN driver for Atheros, bunch of stuff like that. Added a new routing socket message for state changes in DH client in the route command. And if you configure auto join, wireless interfaces will no longer connect to unknown open networks by default. This behavior must now be explicitly enabled by adding an empty network name to the join thing. So if config IWM join, and then a blank name in quotes so that it actually becomes a parameter, and that will make it auto join.
Yeah, I remember we were talking to Peter Hessler about this feature, about making it available to other operating systems or other BSDs as well, because it's kind of like everyone should have that.
Yep. Various security improvements to Unveil, applying Unveil to more utilities like OSPFD, Rebound, getconf, password, spamlogd, etc. Some routing stuff, quite a few improvements, almost a whole page full for BGPD.
Oh, yeah.
Adding KCOV support, so kernel code coverage, so that it's possible to tell, when one side an if statement is never being taken by any code path, and so on. Added a new video promise to pledge to specify that the application should be allowed to talk to the video drivers. And then updating a bunch of embedded software, including OpenSMPDD, LibreSSL, OpenSSH, Mandoc, Xenokera, Clang/LLVM, adding some patches for GCC 4.2.1, and updating the packages, including 10,602 packages for AMD 64, and about 70 or so less for i386. And 9,654 for ARM64. So almost as many as they have for AMD 64.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And as a small note, there's also the work has started on the ISC licensed rsync compatible program called OpenRSync. In this release, it has a basic functionality such as -A or --delete, but lacks --exclude, but work will continue, they write. So that's something people might want to look out for.
I think exclude is one of the only other features beyond basic -A and -delete that I would ever use.
Okay.
I think the other one I've used is delayed update or whatever, where it keeps... Normally, when you rsync a file, it copies it to a temporary file and then replaces the file it's updating atomically at per file. But with delayed update, it does the temporary version of every file and then only renames all into place all at once at the end, so that if you have multiple files that need to be atomically switched together, it's a much tighter window.
Very nice.
Especially useful if you're doing an rsync that's going to take a few hours. You don't end up with some of the files updated them and some of them not. You get either everything's changed or nothing's changed yet.
Yeah, that's what
the downside is. It takes more space.
But that's a trade-off that a lot of people might be willing to do with disk space in abundance.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you check out OpenBSD 6.5 and have a little review or notes or whatever, do send them in to feedback@bsdnow.tv.
Yeah. All right. Next up,
we have a post from our... Go ahead.
Yeah. We have mounted ZFS datasets anywhere you want. So
from our friend Dan Langill.
Always blogging everything that he's doing or exploring in the BSD space or on server space in general.
So what he does is super useful. Not just for everybody else, but more importantly for him. So when he's going to go make a change or something to his system, he starts a blog post and first captures the current state of his system. And then, writes down every command he does and the output. So when he runs into a problem and says, like, hey, Alan, I was trying to do this and it's gone off the rails, I can quickly say, okay, so that's how it was before. And there's what you did. Oh, there's the error message that, it says that you needed to do this before you do that.
Or you're missing this parameter or whatever.
Yeah, it makes it much easier to help him with any problems he might have because I can see what it looked like when he started, not just what it looks like now, and have the question of, well, how did it get like that?
So it's your little collection of breadcrumbs to follow along.
Yes. So it's super useful for him, but it's also useful for other people who could maybe run into the same problem or want to perform the same procedure, and they can this way tell, if their system is different than his before the start and so on.
And this time it's about ZFS datasets and mounting them. And he writes that ZFS is very flexible about mount points. There are many features available to ability know that already. But when you create, here in this case, his main...
Your internet is wobbling and your video keeps bumping up and down. It's a little weird.
Really?
Anyway, so we're talking about mount points in ZFS. And it says when you create a new Z pool, it often... if you create a new pool called main_tank, it will be mounted as /main_tank in the root of your file system. And any datasets you create under it will be mounted under that path. Similar to you see here, he's got a dataset called data, one in there called DVL, and one called freshports, and so on. You might be happy with that, but you might not be. You can do magical things. So mount points are inherited, meaning that if you set the mount point on a parent, all of its child datasets will use that as their base and add their own name to the end of it to come up with their own mount point. But some interesting things is not every file system needs to be mounted. You can have some that aren't if you want. And each file system can have different ZFS characteristics and properties. In this case, let's look at the new Z pool that Dan just created. And you can show you how some of these alternatives work. So in this case, this Z pool uses an NVMe device, so it's really fast, even faster than SSDs. And so his plan is to run all his bacular regression tests on it concurrently. So his use case is to have a storage area for bacular regression tests in jail and have 7 different ones. And then there are directories within the MySQL 5.7 jail, like VARDB MySQL, that he wants to have separate because they'll have different settings. So his goal is to have as few mount directives as possible and use inheritance as much as possible and make it so it just mounts in the right spot.
Makes sense, yeah.
So we can see that he looks here and he creates a new pool called NVD because that's the FreeBSD driver name for NVMe. But he sets that with the -o property. So when he does zpool create, he adds -o can mount equals off. So the NVD directory itself doesn't actually get mounted. The root of the pool is not mounted, and therefore you can't write to it, which goes back to one of the talks after mine at Linux Fest Northwest was how to get the most out of ZFS. And one of the recommendations that I strongly agree with is don't put stuff in the root of your pool.
Yeah.
Put it on datasets so that you can move it around and rename it and replicate it more easily.
Yeah, create as many datasets as you want, like you did with folders earlier.
Yep. And you see here, then he sets compression to LZ4. You can do that after the fact, or you can make it part of your zpool create if you haven't created the pool yet.
I see.
And then you can see he's got a bunch of IOKH jails on his system data set. So he sets the mount point of his NVD pool to actually be /IOKH/jails, so that every data set he creates under this will become /IOKH/jails/ the name. It says we're going to be messing about with the data, and while you might be able to do this while the jail is running, Dan's going to not do that. So he stops the MySQL 5.6 jail, and then he goes into the database directory for it, makes a temp directory, and then does the ZFS Create to set it up.
Yep, nice and easy.
So he creates a VARDB MySQL, MySQL_secure, and MySQL_tempter. And then he sets can mount on to all of them. You shouldn't need to do that. Can mount is one of the only properties that is not inherited. Other thing is you can do ZFS create -o property equals value as part of the create. So you could make this one step instead of 2. But it would make the commands longer, so I see why he didn't do that.
Yeah, and everything's nicely documented, and you get the screen outputs.
Yeah, so he made all the parent directories higher up the stack be not mounted, so that they could overlay on top of. So the idea here is that the jail, the operating system of the jail, will all live on his regular pool, but the database directory will live on the NVMe. So he didn't want all of VARDB to be on the NVMe, only VARDB MySQL. So he used the can mount property to filter out which things would be mounted from the NVMe and which would come from the hard drives.
Makes sense, yeah.
Anyway, it's a detailed guide, but you can check it out. And you see he turned A-time off and moved all his data from the old SQL directory to the new one.
Yep, very straightforward.
Going. So you can have all kinds of fun with mount points. In the talk I gave at VBSDCon, 2015, I think, I talked about really interesting things you could do, including mounting a bunch of stuff So having USR be writable, but user bin and user sbin coming from a different parent that was read-only, and that would be inherited, and so that you could make the operating system immutable, but the rest of the files not.
Yes, yeah. And I also learned there from that presentation, I wasn't there, but I got the slides afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
The P option for ZFS Create will create multiple data sets if you have
just
longer
like
path.
-p.
So that was useful. And yeah, that's pretty much what ZFS provides for you. And it's pretty straightforward. The only thing that most people trip over is that ZFS doesn't require deleting slash in path names. But if you say ZFS set mount points equal, then you need to have the slash in front.
Well, the dataset name is not a path name. It is oftentimes inherited and becomes the path name. But as you can see in Dan's setup, the ZFS dataset name is NVD MySQL56, but the mount point is iocage/jails/MySQL56/root/var/db. Blah blah.
Yeah.
And so it's got whole sections that aren't there, and the beginning is very different. And so you don't want to assume that a dataset name is the same as the mount point just with the leading slash. It's actually possibly quite different.
And if you export and import pools on different systems, you might overwrite without thinking about it. If you have common names like tank, then you might overwrite local file systems with similar.
Not overwrite,
things.
just overmount.
But overmount. Yeah, not completely destroy them, but just shadow them.
Yeah, make them invisible temporarily. And that's why when you do zpool import, there are two options. If you do capital R, you can specify, or using the options, you can specify an alternative root, and this will prefix all the paths of that pool with a different directory. So you can import the second pool all relative to /mnt, so that slash becomes /mnt, so that it doesn't ever overmount something on your main system. Or you can do a zpool import with capital N, and none of the file systems will be mounted, and you can manually mount them after.
Yeah, that's nice. So, time for news roundup this week. We have a branch for NetBSD 9 upcoming. Please help and test. And that's what the message says here on the NetBSD mailing list, the current users. It starts with, folks, once again, we are quite late for branching the next NetBSD release, NetBSD 9. Initially planned to happen early in February 2019. They are now approaching May, and it's unlikely that the branch will happen before that. So on the positive side, they write, lots of good things landed in current in between, like new Mesa, new JEmalloc, lots of ZFS improvements, good, and some of those would be hard to pull up on the branch later. So on the bad side, they saw lots of churn in current recently, and there is quite some failout where we're not even have to good overview right now. So they're still looking at a couple of things there. And this is where you can help. So please test current on all the various machines that you have. Remember, NetBSD runs on the smallest toaster to the biggest mainframe. Especially interesting to them would be to test results from uncommon architectures or strange combinations, like the Spark userland on Spark 64 kernel issue that they ran in apparently yesterday. So yeah, test, report successes or failures, and file PRs for those. And they will likely announce the real branch date of quite short notice. So likely next candidates would be mid-May or end of May, which may require, pun intended, need to do extra steps after the branch. However, less difference between current and the branch, the easier it will be for the release cycle to go. And their goal is to have an unprecedented short release cycle this time. But they always say that up front.
Yep. Next up, we have LibreSSL 2.9.1. So with that announcement, the arrival of LibreSSL directory on your local OpenBSD mirror. This is the first stable release from the 2.9 series, which is what is bundled into OpenBSD 6.5. Changes since 2.8 include API and documentation enhancements, including the crypto lock is now automatically initialized.
Okay.
Some compatibility changes. They added a password-based key derivation function to key derivation support. So you can use PBKDF2 with OpenSSL's enc command. And they changed the defaults to be better. So the default for encrypt is now SHA-256, and the default for digest is now SHA-256.
Mm-hmm.
What? Oh, sorry. The default digest type for encrypt and digest is now both SHA-256. The default fingerprint for X509 is SHA-256, and the default for the certificate revocation list is now SHA-256. Most, if you were actually getting a certificate and paying for it from somebody, they've all required SHA-256 for a while, but it required you to tell OpenSSL, hey, I want that rather than MD5, because the default was still MD5. So it's nice that they caught up with that.
Cool. Yeah. That's good to have without providing extra options.
They've added extensive interoperability tests between LibreSSL and OpenSSL 1.0 and 1.1. The idea here is to make it so that programs don't have to pick one or the other. They can actually be compatible with both. Lots of internal improvements and some portability improvements. And some of the big stuff includes that they now have support for the SM3 hash function and the SM4 block cipher, which are the new Chinese standards. They added more OpenSSL_no_ macro compatibility, so that if your program tries to disable something by setting a flag for OpenSSL, that LibreSSL will respect that. They started porting the elliptic curve key method API from OpenSSL to LibreSSL because they want to use it in OpenSSH. They implemented some more missing stuff from the OpenSSL 1.1 API and added support for XChaCha20 and XChaCha20 Poly 1305.
Okay, well, that's a solid improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so as a closing thing there, that the LibreSSL project continues the improvements of the codebase to reflect modern, safe programming practices, and they welcome feedback and improvements from the broader community. And they thank all the contributors who helped make this release possible.
Indeed.
So as a kind of a continuation to our interview that we had a couple episodes ago with Michael W. Lucas, we now have on his blog the FreeBSD Mastery Jails Bail Bond Denied Edition. So Michael writes, he had a brilliant, hideous idea to produce a charity edition of FreeBSD Mastery, Jails, featuring the cover art he would use if he was imprisoned and did not have access to real cover artists. In quote, never mind that he wouldn't be permitted to release books while in jail. The sort of creative folks there are at mere legal and cultural details. So yeah, he originally wanted to produce his own take on the book's cover art. His first attempt failed spectacularly, and then downgraded his expectations and tried again, and again, and again. And he's pleased now to reveal the final cover for FreeBSD Mastery Bail Bond Edition. So here, yes, well, it's certainly artistic in a certain way. And this cover represents the very pinnacle of his artistic talents, he writes, and it's the result of literally hours of efforts that weren't spent on writing, mind you. But as this book is available only to the winners of charity fundraisers, purchase of this tome represents moral supremacy. He recommends flaunting it to your family, coworker, and all those lesser of character. And you can get your copy by winning the BSDCan 2019 charity auction, which is in a couple of weeks only, or any other auction type event that he deems worthwhile. And as far as his moral fiber goes, he has learned that art is hard and artists are not paid enough. And if he's ever imprisoned, he does hope that we'll contribute to his bail bond. Otherwise, you get more covers like this one.
Yep.
Okay.
And then finally, we have a post from our friend Chris Seiberman about one reason that Ed was a good editor back in the days of V7 Unix.
Ah, interesting.
He says, it is common to describe Ed as being a line-oriented as opposed to screen-oriented editor like VI. This is completely accurate, but it is perhaps not a complete enough description for today because Ed is line-oriented in a way that is not now uncommon. After all, you could say that your shell is line-oriented too, and very few people use shell that work and feel the same way as Ed does. The surface difference between most people's shells and Ed is that most people's shells have some version of cursor-based interactive editing. The deeper difference is that this requires the shell to run a character-by-character TTY input mode, also called raw mode. By contrast, Ed runs in what UNIX usually calls cooked mode, where it reads whole lines from the kernel and the kernel handles things like the backspace processing. All of Ed's commands are designed so that they work in this line-focused way, including being terminated by the end of the line. And as a whole, Ed's interface makes this whole line input approach natural. In fact, I think Ed makes it so natural that it's hard to think of things being any other way. Ed was designed for for line at a time input and not to be used in a screen-oriented manner. He says, this was carefully preserved in the University of Toronto's Ed Very Clever Zap command, which let you modify a line by writing out the modifications on a new line beneath the original. This input mode is not very important today, but in the days of V7 Unix and serial terminals, it made a real difference. In cooked mode, V7 ran very little code when you entered each character. Almost everything was deferred until it could be processed in bulk by the kernel and then handed to Ed all in a single line, which Ed could then process all at once. A version of Ed that tried to work in raw mode would have been much more resource intensive, even if it still operated on a single line at a time. If you want to imagine such a version of Ed, think about how a typical read-line-enabled Unix shell can move back and forth through your command history while only displaying a single line. Now augment that sort of interface with a way of issuing VI-like bulk editing commands. This is part of why I feel that Ed was once a good editor. Ed is carefully adapted for the environment of early Unixes, which ran on small and slow machines with limited memory, which led to Ed not holding the file it's editing in memory, instead only dealing with a line at a time. Part of this adaptation is being an editor that worked with a system, not against it. And on V7 Unix, that meant working in cooked mode instead of raw mode. VI appeared on more powerful and more capable machines. I believe it was first written when BSD Unix was running on the VAX.
Could very well be.
And then he updates his post saying he's gotten some feedback. He says, I'm wrong in part about how V7 Ed works. See the comment from Frank G. V7 Ed runs in cooked mode, but it reads input from the kernel a character at a time instead of in large blocks.
Okay. But yeah, it's an interesting piece of history or editor history and how the early days of Unix were line-oriented.
Well, it could make a big difference as far as, especially when you're on really slow remote connections, not redrawing a bunch of stuff on the screen all the time.
Which is yeah, that's true. So, time for the Beastie Bits this week. Remember a couple of episodes ago when Alan said that in April there will be interesting things coming down the ZFS pipeline? Here they are.
Yes.
Call for testing.
So Chris Moore, who you might have heard about on this show before when he hosted it, has issued the call for testing for the new FreeBSD, or ZFS on FreeBSD, I think is what they've been calling it. But this is as we work to try to change the upstream version of ZFS from Illumos to Linux, because that's where new features are landing, it was decided that because of the level of divergence, it would make more sense to report ZFS from Linux to FreeBSD using the existing Solaris compatibility layer that's already being used by Linux and FreeBSD. So we're not, as part of porting ZFS on Linux to FreeBSD, we're not actually using the Linux KPI stuff like we do for the graphics drivers. It's all still native FreeBSD code, or using the Solaris wrappers to translate Solaris code that ZFS uses to FreeBSD code. So there's not actually any Linux code being used here. But anyway, importing that newer version of ZFS onto FreeBSD, and the first public call for testing is now available. So you can install from ports sysutils ZOL and sysutils ZOL-kmod, and this will provide the userland and the kernel module for this new version of ZFS. Now, the existing userland is not compatible because it's for an older version, basically. So it works better if you have a version of FreeBSD compiled with ZFS turned off and then install this version from ports. And it only works with 12 stable and 13 head because it requires the new encryption algorithm support that's only available in those versions. So to make your life easier, they offer pre-built ISOs of FreeBSD 12 and FreeBSD 13 with ZFS disabled and the package set up for you. So if you grab these images and try them out, you can actually see how the new version of ZFS will work and get to play with some of the new features, including like zpool iostat has support for displaying latencies. There's a bunch of other histogram stuff, so it's easier to get information about what ZFS is doing and how fast it's going, and so on and so on. And there's a couple other things in there, including the new native encryption stuff, although I would avoid focusing on that part just yet, as it's got a bunch of updates. So this snapshot of the ZFS on Linux repo is from December. So it also does not have the trim support. So ZFS on Linux got the new version of trim that was developed at Nexenta on Solaris years ago, and is now finally available for everybody. They added that in over the course of the month of April. So once this call for testing is done, and we get the release of ZFS on Linux 0.8 is done, and the first big splurge of commits that we're waiting for that to finish all land, then we will rebase the ZFS on Linux port on FreeBSD and get that done. So by the end of the summer, we should have all the features that Linux does available, including the new better trim support and the native encryption, and all of the other features that have come to ZFS on Linux, or anything. So all the newest ZFS stuff will be available on FreeBSD with this, and it looks pretty good. If you do find issues, please head over to ZFS on FreeBSD/ZOF on GitHub and file the bug reports.
Yes, the more testing we get, the better the bugs are found and hopefully fixed. And from that point on, we'll all, once we have that imported after the summer, we'll make the integration between the two parts, or the collaboration between the different projects that are using ZFS much easier.
Yes. Like I think the goal here now is that later in the summer, when we get synced up with ZFS on Linux, we'll actually open a pull request against ZFS on Linux to add the FreeBSD support to their repo.
Understood.
And so the ZFS stuff will live upstream, the FreeBSD bits will live upstream, and new commits to ZFS on Linux will have to pass the CI testing on Linux and FreeBSD before they can be merged.
Okay.
So that'll save effort for both us and them and make everybody happy.
Yes, and the interoperability, if you have to, transfer data between different operating systems that are using ZFS, will always have the same features available.
Yeah, what'll be the most interesting is trying to decide whether we want to stick with keeping the ZFS stuff as a port, because it can be updated more often that way, and means that, for example, FreeBSD 12.1 could get updated ZFS without having to update the OS. But there are downsides to having ZFS external. So we probably want it internal.
Yeah.
But can we make it coexist so that you can have it built into FreeBSD like it is now and have all the good integration, but have the option to upgrade the version of ZFS from packages and have it not conflict with the version in base?
Yeah. But that will that's decisions that need to be happening once the integration is done.
For that, what we might consider doing is having the binaries that live in the usual place, like the zpool command and the ZFS command, actually be smart wrappers that know, okay, look for the package. If it's not there, then look where we stashed the FreeBSD native ZFS stuff. So that if you have the package installed, you don't have to modify your path to use it first. The switcher will do it. And if you don't, then it'll run the FreeBSD versions or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
Or maybe, we end up with naming the command ZFS.FreeBSD and ZFS.ZOF or something like that. And then the switcher switches between those two or something.
Yeah, that's
interesting ideas. That is something we'll figure out probably in the fall rather than sooner.
Yeah. So keep testing, report feedback, anything that you find, and then it will be
If you want
ready.
the upgrade of ZFS to go smoothly, you have to help out.
Yeah. Okay, next up, we have a simple DNS At Block for you. First of all, we have a little bit of graphic because it provides a web front end to see how much blocking was going on a specific URL or a specific target. And it's basically built upon, what's it called? DJB DNS? Oh, no, DNS masquerading. Yeah, so DNS mask. And that is used, first of all, to build the web front end, you build their instructions how to build the jar using Gradle. And running that, then there's commands to run the block list to update that one because you want to always have the latest websites that are into the ad block thing. And so that needs to be updated regularly. And then there's the log processor that basically goes through your log files and figures out, this should be blocked, this shouldn't be. And then the database is queried by the web app, which sends requests, which are processed by the Kotlin backend. And then you install the DNS server on FreeBSD only. They have instructions using two sysrc commands to add that to your etcrc.conf. And there's a little bit of a config section for your DNS masquerading daemon, and that's provided as well.
What's really interesting here is looking at the graph they have, which shows, looks like a 1-day period. More than half of the queries were blocked as being ads. So you can imagine how much this could actually speed up your web browser experience as it blocks Facebook ads and cookies on every website, Google Analytics, Microsoft stuff, DoubleClick, which is also Google ads.
Yeah, you will see the web in a completely new light.
YouTube ads, lots of other ads.
And since it's blocked at a very low level, at the DNS level, it will not have to process, like Alan said, a lot of stuff into your browser first and then discarding it there. So that will speed up things significantly in certain cases.
Yeah, and on mobile devices, it can end up saving a lot of battery.
Oh, yes, yeah. So that's significant. So yeah, try it out and see how it works for you. Then we found an AT&T UNIX PC in 1985. On Twitter, this is a posting from kernel perspective. So the tweet goes, when AT&T attempted to market UNIX PC in 1985, Byte created the cover story, the Byte magazine. Machine was running Unix System 5 Revision 2 and used a primitive windowing system called User Agent. The price was $6,600 for 20 megabyte hard disk with 1 megabyte of memory, about $15,000 in today's terms. And you can see the picture here from the Byte magazine. Yeah, here we go. That was 1985. Cool.
Yep. Or for only $5,095, you get the 10 megabyte hard drive version with only half a megabyte of memory.
For a few dollars more, yeah.
Unix itself was an extra $495.
Oh yeah, and there's a bunch of people commenting on that.
Yeah, so there was a Motorola 6810 processor, which provided 32/16-bit microprocessor, so 32-bit internal data path and registers, but 16-bit external data bus, a 24-bit address line, so meaning it could address up to 16 megabytes of data, and support for virtual memory, which would be swap, basically. Ran at 10 megahertz and could be expanded with up to 2 megabytes of memory.
Yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere. I mean, this is how modern computing got started.
Includes custom memory management hardware and a Winchester disk, allowing a virtual memory space of up to 4 megabytes using a 4 kilobyte page size. And had a 16 kilobyte EEPROM used for initialization program when power or reset is applied.
I mean, you have to have that, of course.
And a double-sided 5.5-inch floppy drive using 48 tracks per inch, capable of reading IBM PC data and source code disks and storing 320 kilobytes per disk in AT&T format, or 360 bytes per disk in MS-DOS format.
And don't forget the mouse, the 3-button optomechanical mouse, needs no special surface. So yeah, we might be laughing, but back in the days, this was state of the art, and a lot of things were built on that.
12-inch green-on-black display displays bitmap graphics at resolutions of up to 348 by 720 pixels.
Classic. I mean, we tune our terminals nowadays to have that retro look, but that is the standard where they all started with.
Yep.
What, you want colors? 4K? What's that?
4K, that's the amount of memory you have to do all the screen with.
Exactly. It's all coming back in some way. Okay, speaking of coming back, OpenBSD current DRM at 4.19 includes new support for Intel GPUs like Coffee Lake. No, this is not the coffee lake you get when spilling your coffee. This is the CPU. And this is the changelog that we have here, or the commit actually on OpenBSD-CVS. And it's a lot of stuff. And yeah, add support for more Intel hardware, Broxton, Apollo Lake, Amber Lake, Gemini Lake, Coffee Lake, Whiskey Lake, and Cannon Lake, as well as Ice Lake. So a lot of people will be happy now that their GPUs are running smoothly on OpenBSD.
Yeah, I kind of wish that the port on FreeBSD mentioned what Linux version it was based on. I think we're at least that far ahead now as well, which is nice.
It took a lot of effort, yeah. And apparently the OpenBSD Foundation was sponsoring this work, and Katanis is also thanked here for helping, and a bunch of other developers for testing. Oh yes, of course, you have to have the GPUs actually to test those. So yeah, that was powered by sponsoring the OpenBSD Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And we found another Twitter thread with the question, what are the differences between Linux and OpenBSD? And you might think that there's a lot of pitchforking and fire and bad things thrown at each other going on, but it seems like this is fairly civil. Well, at least for today's Twitter. It starts like this. Maybe you have been reading about the release of OpenBSD 6.5 and wonder, what are the differences between Linux and OpenBSD? And to some extent, other BSDs. And Carlos Fenolosa, who has written this post, writes, I've also been there at some point, and these are his conclusions. And that's a Twitter thread of a couple of pages. And he covers a couple of things from documentation to, X terminals or software available. And of course, it starts with a disclaimer. This list is aimed at people who are used to Linux and are curious about OpenBSD. It is written to highlight the most important changes from their perspective, not the absolute most important changes from a technical standpoint. And so, yeah. But it's basically, a good list of arguments, pros and cons in, making OpenBSD an interesting platform to at least have a look at.
Yep, and then we have, what's the next one?
The package source.
Yes, package source 2019 Q1 has been released. The package source developers are proud to announce their 62nd quarterly release in the cross-platform package manager, available with more than 22,000 packages running on 23 different platforms. And if you want to know more about package source, you can check it out there. In total, this quarterly adds 227 new packages, 47 removed packages, and 2,174 packages have been updated.
Cool. Yeah, it's a good
so
effort.
they have the new Bind 9.11 and 9.12, the Dolphin emulator. Firefox has been updated to version 60.6 for the extended support version and 66 for the main version. GCC 7.4, Gatea 1.7.4, updated Go, including 1.11 and 1.12, LibreOffice 6.2, Mate 1.22, Midori 8, MySQL 5.6 and 5.7, NPM 9.6, or 6.9, sorry, Nextcloud 15, Node.js 10.15, PHP 5.6, 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3, Packaging 0.11, which is the binary package manager for package source, Postgres 9.4, 9.5, 9.6, 10.7, and 11.2, Python 2.7, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, and 3.7. My favorite, Quazzle 0.13 is available.
Here we go again.
Ruby 2.5 and 2.6, Rust 1.33, SQLite 3.27, Prolog 8, Tor Browser 8.5, Vim 8.1.1004. That's a lot of patches. WebKit GTK 2.24 and Zen 4.11. And they removed PHP 7.0 and Ruby on Rails 3.2.
Yeah.
And Go 1.12 is now the default.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. So yeah, package source, not just on NetBSD, it's available on many other systems, and a lot of work goes into it. So thanks for these efforts. Okay, let's get right into the feedback and questions section, which has a couple of items in there, but there could be more. So if you have any question, feedback, show ideas, topics that you want to have us cover in the show, send this to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and this will be the place to put them here. Today we start off with
not
Brad.
The place to be?
That too, yeah. Sure, yeah. Okay, let's go with the first one with Brad with an IOCage question. Goes like this. Hi JT, Alan and Benedict. As I recall, Alan still uses Warden for jails, but I'm hoping one of the others of you has experience with IOCage.
So I've never used Warden for jails. I was still using EasyJail. I don't have much experience with IOCage, but our friend Dan Langill has been using it quite a bit. Seems to like it, although he's had some issues with the latest version such that he had to switch to using the development version to get the fixes. And then the development version had breakage 2 or 3 times as well. And so he's had some very interesting things with IOCage, turning things read-only on him and then back and then unmounting stuff and a bunch of weird stuff happening. But he's still using it, so he must be a fan. You can check out his Twitter feed or his blog for more information about what he thinks of IOCage. Yeah, and IOCage is also covered in FreeBSD Mastery jails, so there's a good start into the topic. Yeah, Michael Lucas covered it because he found it to be the most active one and had quite a few conversations with the developer to fix some bugs that he found while trying to test it. So it seems quite new because of that, but those bugs are getting fixed, which is a good thing. Yes. So that was the question. First, yes. The first question he has is IOCage working in FreeNAS 11.2? I think it's based on all these jails that they run. It should work fine. Fairly sure. Yeah. Sorry, you skipped the rest of his question. Yeah. Oh, you mean the first paragraph? Yeah. So on his desktop machine, he was running IOCage 0.99 something on TrueOS 18.3, had built several jails before he nuked and paved onto FreeBSD 12.0 release and did IOCage export jail name, then attempted to IOCage import on his laptop, which was already running 12.0 and IOCage 1.0. None of them would import on the 12.0 box. Unfortunately, he has lost the error messages. That might have something to do with that TrueOS 18.03. 1803 might have been old enough, but it's also possible that it was actually running newer versions of FreeBSD, like it was actually based on head, so it would be too new, and might have caused problems there. I'm not entirely... My understanding that IOCage export is actually a ZFS replication stream, and so it should be importable as long as you have at least this new version of ZFS.
Mm.
I'm not entirely sure what IO cage export does, and yes, without the error message, it's hard to help you.
Yeah. And the second question is, will he be able to migrate
the first
jails?
question we didn't answer yet. So yeah, the first question about IO cage on 11.2, as far as I know, that works.
Yeah, because they have an upgrade path for people who want to upgrade, so they don't throw all the old jails out of the window. They have a way to upgrade to the newer version. The second, will I be able to migrate jails from FreeNAS, which has the Pi 36 IO cage version there?
Right. So the IO cage version there, the version number is actually the version of FreeNAS _ datestamp, which is not obviously the same as the actual version number they use on FreeBSD. So it's hard to tell. That's mostly a question of IO cage, but I would assume so.
Yeah. Maybe they have something in the FreeNAS forums about that. That might be a way to get some help.
But it's also not something that FreeNAS is necessarily going to support. It's really, I'd ask the IO cage people on their site or GitHub or whatever, because that's, they're more likely to have the answer than the FreeNAS people.
Yeah, so he'd like to start getting setting up several jails, one for Saltmaster, one for possibly Monet, and he's still shopping for a network monitor, but that's a separate issue. Yeah, so maybe someone has a practical experience about the jails or some recommendations, but figured just
I know
ask.
IO cage has been changing a lot, so it's entirely possible there were some compatibility problems between versions.
Yeah, that's sometimes unavoidable, but hopefully you have a way to get those old jails back and then migrate over. All right, so thanks for that question. Next up is Frank with video from Level 1 Tech and a question. Goes like this. I thought you guys might find this video from Level 1 Tech interesting. It's an update on their experience with the Cavium Thunder X on FreeBSD, Red Hat Enterprise, and SUSE.
Yes,
okay, that's
I was
a
meaning
YouTube
to
link.
follow up with that. I saw Wendell asking questions about FreeBSD on the Thunder X. And I think Ed helped him a bit, but I wanted to make sure that he got helped, and I kind of forgot.
Okay, and his question is, you always hear about Linux distributions running white box / bare metal network switches. Are there any BSDs in that same space?
It depends mostly on the chipset and so on of the switch. For example, the little TP-Link routers have a built-in Atheros switch that has drivers for FreeBSD, and so you can configure the switch to run to like set up the VLANs and so on. Usually in these cases, it's actually a little different than it sounds. So there's a management plane that runs on like an ARM processor or something, or MIPS or whatever, and that runs Linux or BSD. Then the actual switch runs its own custom hardware on like an ASIC and just gets programmed by the management plane. And so the actual packets that are going through the switch never actually go up into the management plane. And there's just a utility in the management plane that can program the switch. Yeah, I'm sure there's a couple that use BSD, but it'd be nice if there were more.
Yeah, and maybe people have found a way to make BSD run on those. So
yeah, the big point is that the switching is still done by the switching hardware. The management interface is separate.
Yeah. And he finally writes, I'd like to thank BSD now, but I have yet to try a BSD. The show was my early introduction to ZFS. Oh, wow. A friend asked if I had heard of ZFS and if I'd like to apply for a support position where he worked. That was a little over 3 years ago, and I have been at Datto ever since. Oh, great.
Oh, that's interesting. I've met quite a few people from Datto via ZFS User Conference and ZFS Developer Summits. I worked with a couple of them. So you might ask your friend if they've actually met me. And if so, say hi from me.
It's a small world, yeah. Yeah, but that's great feedback. I mean, just listening to a podcast, what kind of ideas and new directions you might take.
Yeah, but definitely want to say hi to Tom and Alex and a bunch of other people from Datto that I've met over the years. And I was a little sad that I didn't get to come out and see you guys for the ZFS User Conference this year.
Yeah, but maybe there's a next time somewhere. All right, thanks for that question, Frank. And the last but not least is Niall with a revision control question. Goes like the following. Hi, Alan and Benedict. Could you give a quick overview of the FreeBSD project revision control system? He remembers Michael W. Lucas mentioning 2 systems during episode 267, but I think they were back to front. I corrected the statement, but the conversation had moved on. Okay. And while reading the man page for Git, he was amused to find that his line in the name description, Git, the stupid content tracker. He can remember Alan mentioning that the FreeBSD Git repository was a read-only copy of the project's source of truth, but thought a quick rundown of the project setup could provide a useful guide to people.
Sure. Currently, the source of truth for the source code for the operating system, the documentation, and the ports tree is in Subversion, which is a source code control system that has existed since before Git, and is the successor to CVS, which was the successor to SCCS. Or no, CVS was the successor to RCS, which is the successor to SCCS.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we've come a long way.
The main difference is that CVS is based on basically each new commit has a number that monotonically increases, and that's the revision number. So like, I think we just hit 500,000 revisions on the ports tree. Mm-hmm. And each of those revisions is basically the diff that applies to the previous one. And so you just basically have this set of changes each time.
Just the deltas. Yeah.
Right. And SVN can do things that are a little bit copy on write. So when you branch something, so when you take the head version of FreeBSD and branch it off to make, say, stable 12, it doesn't take twice as much space anymore. It just says, oh, these files are copies of these files from that time. And then you just have a different set of diffs that apply to them. Git works a bit different. Instead of having diffs to files, it has more the concept of this blob of code changed or moved. And it has some advantages. The big difference is Git is what's called distributed and offline, meaning you can do a Git commit on your laptop without the internet. So like if you're on an airplane, you can commit. Now that commit only lives on your laptop, and later you can sync that up with other people. Whereas with SVN, commits send something to the repo, and so require an internet connection to commit.
Yeah, to a central place. Yeah.
Yeah. The downside to the Git way is that, things can end up happening out of order, kind of. Because I made a commit last week on my laptop while I was on an airplane, and I didn't sync it till today. People that made commits in the meantime, we have to reorder it, and the history can change, and it's a bit weird. So there are pros and cons. I don't know the internals all that much.
Yeah, there are books on that are probably more in detail.
But a number of people have kind of explained that SVN is a revision control system. It's designed to keep track of the current version of the software and solve problems and so on. Git is more of a collaboration tool. It's meant to make it easier to work with other people and doesn't necessarily do as good a job on keeping track of individual changes.
Yeah, although a lot of people are using it nowadays as the standard.
Right, because it turns out we care more about being able to work with other people and not waste time than we care about making sure
we preserve the history until...
you don't lose history necessarily.
No, we don't.
You can squash a series of commits down to one and erase that part of history. But yeah, but SVN biases more towards being exactly moving forward, and whereas Git is more about making it easier to collaborate with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he was prompted to ask this question after reading a blog post by Greg Lemis, The Horrors of Revision Control. The link is there. And at the end of the blog post, he links to a humorous tongue-in-cheek auto-generated man page on Git. And
yes, there's a couple of websites that auto-generate man pages on Git, and they're quite funny. The Git user interface is pretty appalling at times. The worst part, I think, is just that they reuse some keywords that people are used to with things like Subversion, but made them mean something else. So in Subversion, to check out means to get a copy of a repo. It's like the first thing you do. But in Git, that's called cloning. And checkout is erase my changes and go back to what upstream had, which is what SVN calls revert. Although confusingly, sometimes revert you would think would mean I want to undo a change that's in the repo. But it actually means I want to throw away the changes I have that aren't in the repo. And then if you actually want to undo something that's in the repo in SVN, you have to do a reverse merge, basically. You merge the opposite of the patch that added it to unadd it.
Yeah.
And it gets weird because if you've not pushed up to the repo yet, you can edit the local history and just make the commit never have happened. Although if you've pushed it, then you have to do the negative commit thing.
Yeah. So yeah, there are some tricks that aren't in a normal operation that you wouldn't do normally, but sometimes they're necessary.
Yeah.
So yeah, and he closes with, love the show and tune in each week from Australia. Oh, wow. That's a lot of international people. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for enjoying that. And that's the end of our show this week. Again, send us anything that you found about BSD to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and then we'll have a future episode for you as always.
Yep. Thank you.